More factoring by decomposition. They're turning up the evilness now in a couple of ways. The first here is, well, what do you think? What's the matter with this? The obvious problem is it's not in decreasing order. So if we sort this out, we would write minus 2y squared, and then the minus 7y, and then the plus 15. That's more like it. Another thing we can do, should do, is when there's a leading negative like this, factor it out immediately. It makes all the rest of the factoring easier to visualize and easier to do. So if you take a minus 1 out of this whole thing, negative 2y squared divided by negative 1 is 2y squared. Negative 7y divided by negative 1 becomes plus 7y. 15 divided by negative 1 becomes negative 15. Do you have to do that? Absolutely not. Does it make it easier? You bet it does. Now, we're going to have to carry this negative 1 for the rest of the problem, but it makes the quadratic a lot easier to deal with. I recommend doing this every time. You'll never regret tweaking the order and taking out that negative at the start. So now, getting back to our decomposition drill, our middle coefficient is 7, and our first times last coefficients would be 2 times negative 15 makes negative 30. So, how's this going to work? Here's the ways you can make 30. 1 goes into 30, 30 times. 2 goes into 30, 15 times. 3 goes into 30, 10 times. 4 goes 7.5 times, ignore that. 5 goes into 36 times. 6 goes, we already have 6, so you can stop right there. So, which of these combinations can make 7? No, no, yes. Negative 3 and plus 10 can add up to 7, and they'll multiply to negative 30. So here's our rewritten quadratic. 2y squared, our minus 15 goes over here. And instead of 7y, I'm going to put minus 3y plus 10y. And now we factor by grouping, 2 at a time. This minus 1 is still there, just not doing anything, just standing there, lurking. What can we factor out of these first couple terms? We can take out a y, and that's it. That leaves us with 2y minus 3. And from the second pair, we can take out a 5, and that leaves us with 10 divided by 5 is 2y, 15 divided by 5, negative 3. Here's our common factor that we were hoping would happen, so take that out. We get 2y minus 3, and the pieces left behind are y plus 5. Next one. Descending order, that part's okay, but there is something we can still do to improve this before we start. Do you see it? This has a common factor of 5. We can and should take that out before we do anything more complicated. 15 divided by 5 gives me 3k squared. 5 divided by 5 gives just 1k. Negative 10 divided by 5 leaves me with negative 2. So, middle coefficient is 1. First times last would be 3 times negative 2 would be negative 6. So we need a couple of numbers that add up to 1 and multiply to negative 6. By the way, if you hadn't factored this thing out, you would right now be looking for a pair of numbers that multiply to 150, which is getting a little big. The factoring is easier if you take these common factors out. It generally gives you smaller, tamer numbers to work with. Let's see. Have to add up to 1. Positive 3 and negative 2 will do the trick, I believe. Those two numbers add up to 1, and when you multiply them, you get minus 6. So here's our rewrite. 3k squared. Way over here is minus 2. And in the middle we get plus 3k minus 2k. So the k that we had in the first place is replaced by these two guys, which add up to the same amount. And now we factor by grouping. The 5 just sits there. It's going to be out front for the whole rest of the problem, but we don't have to do anything else with it other than just remember to copy it down. These two terms have a common factor of 3k. With that gone, we're left with k plus 1. And from these two terms, you could take out a 2, but remember, if this first term is negative, it is better to take out the negative as well. Negative 2k divided by negative 2 gives k. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 gives 1. And here's that common factor that we need. Finished product will be 5. Out comes the k plus 1. And with the k plus 1s gone, we get 3k minus 2.